This type of contraption extends the case in order to make room for thicker fans or a radiator or both. In this case, the Nouvolo Steck, you don't have to use it at the top necessarily, but let's take a look here at the utility of the so-called Tophats. Welcome to Machines More. Just a quick update here on the Tophats or bottom hats. Quite a few SFF cases on the market are modular like this. The low-key Ghost, for one, allows them, and some SFF cases are interestingly modular without having to add anything like the Fantex Shift XT. The top hat for the Nouvolo Steck comes in a box in separate pieces, and you can option these on when you buy the case. These will add roughly $25 for each top hat. If you just buy the top hat standalone without the case, it's a bit more. I'm guessing most folks will decide at the time of case purchase, so the $25 seems like a good guideline there. The top hat adds about 34 millimeters of height to the case overall, and so roughly it adds that much to the available space for fans or a radiator, or both. You remove the clips for the top cover, and then you screw the new front and rear top hat brackets in. And then after you install the side panels, you would clip the sides of the top hat in. It's got the same keyhole slot type of mechanism as the side panels, and it has to be done this way because if you didn't do it this way, you can't get your side panel on or off. It's just a nuance of the design. Now, with one of the top hat brackets I received as part of the sample kit, it was completely misaligned. I mean, the threaded posts here, they're positioned incorrectly, and that led to the top hat looking all wonky at first. Now, if this was the one I got, if I bought the case, I'd definitely ask for a replacement, but for the sake of testing, I don't think it'll skew the results. I did have another bracket, and I put that in its place, but it's just something to take note of if you are interested in this case. Initially, my impression of the case's build quality was that it was above average or somewhere around average. I mean, the panels didn't line up perfectly to begin with, but now I really don't know. This is pretty sloppy, and one of the included screws with the top hat kit didn't even have the threads cut. So I have a feeling that this case is going to be hit or miss in terms of the QC department. This bracket, it did sit flush with the top, but then it's proud of the side, so, you know. Anyhow, the first thing I tested was if this increases the air cooling capability when we put on those Fantex T30, the 30 millimeter fans, which, one thing to note, they are mounted at the top of the case, but they are not flush with the top because of the where the bracket is positioned. Now that means that there's still going to be some recirculation that can occur because the exhaust does not leave the case cleanly. With the top hat, this does bring the volume to over 15 liters, and we're almost as tall as a regular NR200, and that's pretty close to the comparison cases here in terms of the volume. And now we're all using the same case fans at the same RPM. Quick side note, some of you might be wondering about the IS60 EVO versus the Big Shuriken 3 that is used in the comparisons here. Typically I try to choose a heatsink setup that maximizes the case, that allows us to get the cooler fan as close to the side panel as possible, and that minimizes the opportunity for re-intake. And all else being equal, the IS60 EVO and the Big Shuriken 3 with the same exact fan on them, you know, at the same RPM, that is going to test out within run-to-run variants here, so they're very close. So with the T30 in place, there's a meaningful improvement here, 1.7 degrees. So while we aren't as close to the Q58, it's pretty close to the Shift XT. What about in a combined scenario? Well, here's the one thing about the setup with the bigger fans. And in a combined air-cooled scenario like I'm testing here, there's not much of a difference. If anything, it's a little worse. Now, if you're using a lower powered GPU, you'll probably see an improvement with the bigger case fans, but I think what's happening here is that the suboptimal placement of the case fans with the very large gap above them, combined with a hot GPU, because now you have a hotter ambient case temperature, it's allowing the very hot GPU exhaust to recirculate enough, so much so that it mitigates, it just cancels out the impact of having more airflow to begin with. It's not so evident for the CPU only scenario because there's less heat in the case, but with the GPU running, yeah, it's a big difference. In the initial setup, at least with the slim fans, the air was exiting the case directly, so that was a better scenario. So I think one potential improvement here would be to allow the case fans to mount either on the top directly or towards the top of the top hat versus keeping the original position of the fan bracket. So that's going to take some retooling there. As it stands, there's not much sense in getting the top hat for pure air cooling here. Now, where it does make a material impact is if you want to liquid cool this thing, since you won't be able to fit a radiator and fans with the stock setup. And from what I understand, Steck shows an AIO with slim fans for this particular case, suggesting that even with the top hat, slim fans are required here. So with a little repositioning of the brackets that's actually underneath where it was before, I was able to place the PL240 Flux radiator, plus Noctua NFA 12x25s here with bumpers removed, and I was actually quite happy with that since I didn't expect that to fit initially. Thermals, though, are a different story. These here are all featuring the same or similar AIOs with the biggest fan they can take, and if you compare top to bottom, and this is apples to apples here, same exact AIO, there's a big spread, 7 degrees. Now, I'm not sure why that is. What I did was remove all the panels on this case, and I retested it, and it came in ballpark of where the A4H2O was. So I'm guessing the flow restriction is maybe too much from the top and the side panels, and maybe the placement of the internal components, it's just not optimal. So there's definitely some room for improvement. One thing is that at least when it comes to combined thermals, the Steck 2.0 with AIO is competent. The GPU thermals they're well in line with competing cases. One thing I did notice is that the GPU temps when air cooling the CPU, they were a lot worse than when liquid cooling. And usually in sandwich cases, that's not necessarily what you see. Obviously the case fans are running slower typically than compared to when they're being used as radiator fans, but more or less that can be mitigated by the fact that there is no radiator there causing resistance, and so you have more or less similar airflow. However, that's not what we're seeing here, and so I wonder if the airflow design in this case somehow does also bias more to the motherboard side in a combined scenario, and that the CPU cooler fan is somehow able to steal more airflow at the expense of the air-cooled GPU. Either way, top hats in this case, obviously you absolutely need them if you want to run an AIO. At the same time, I think there are better cases for straight liquid coolers and at a much lower cost like the A4H2O. As far as air cooling goes, unless you can adjust the position of your case fans, there's not a whole lot you're gaining here. Maybe a little bit improved noise from thicker fans, but you're going up whole size bracket here. You can also get another top hat to put at the bottom if you're after a custom loop setup, and that will allow you to place 2 rads. But this case is already pretty tall. It's almost as tall as an NR200 with just 1 top hat here. So plus another 34 millimeters. That's something to consider. At the end of the day, while I think the airflow of this case, it's not terrible, I think it can do a lot better, and there's a lot of potential here. There's a good amount of space between the top of the motherboard section and the fans, so I think you can probably get a little bit closer there. There's room for optimization if you kind of compress things down vertically, maybe just omit the whole bottom gap here. You're going to end up with more direct airflow and lower case volume at the same time. And I think that's where you see a lot of the designs going these days for sandwich cases. So I'll leave the build components down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thanks for watching today.